Hi everyone, this is Tom from Big Bainon's Blacksmithing, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make your own knife from a piece of old car spring. So a nice material to work with. Some people don't enjoy it too much because they worry about microfractures. However, if you work it hot enough throughout, you shouldn't have any problems. And also it's a material you can pick up for free, usually at your local garage. If you go down and ask if they're chucking any out with the scrap, they're usually more than happy to let you have a coil or two to play around with. So it's nice and easy to get hold of and can make very functional knives, I've got to say. I think I've made about 100 knives or so now from car springs, and of all of them I've only had 2 fail. So I always say thumbs up to car spring. So we're using a solid fuel forge to do this, and hopefully you'll be able to use this short film as a step-by-step guide into creating your own knife. So while that fire gets going, it will take about 5-10 minutes for it to get up to a proper forging temperature. So while that does, we are going to go and we're going to cut a section from our car spring. We're only going to take a short section, maybe about 6 to 8 inches in length. This one piece actually I will be able to forge about 3 or 4 knives from if I use the material nice and efficiently. You can see it here, just a short piece, and the knife that we're going to be making is actually that one on the top there, a nice Dutch knife from the 13th, 14th centuries. So with your spring steel, your very first job is actually going to be straightening out any curves in the material. It is spring steel, so make sure you work it hot. Ideally don't work it below 800 degrees or so. The perfect heat to be working at is 980 degrees centigrade. Bright yellow, incandescent yellow really. Don't work it really if it drops below a dull orange temperature. If you go any further than that, you'll really risk of putting fractures into the blade, which may not show up now. They may show up 2 hours down the line while you're putting the handle on, and you waste all that work and material and time just doing that to find that your blade snaps. So your first step, once you've straightened them out, is to actually flatten a section of the metal. And once you get it down to less than half thickness, we need to put the point of the blade on. So raise them up, bring them to the edge of the anvil so the face doesn't get in the way as you're hammering, and start to put a point on. But as you forge that point down, make sure you turn the metal flat onto the anvil and stop it from galling, giving it a few hammer blows near that tip to make sure the metal isn't folding in on itself and creating a gall. Basically a flaw in the metal, which later on could cause it to snap, could cause problems when heat treating, or if it somehow makes its way all the way through the process without you noticing, it could cause that tip to snap off when it's first used. So make sure you keep that nice and level as you go. Once you have forged the tip down, switch to the cross peen. We should have a nice pointed profile to this metal, and using the cross peen, hammer in a ladder, overlapping blows, kind of like a ladder, steps of a ladder, rungs of a ladder, and basically you are pushing the metal forwards without widening it too much, and you are making that metal longer but thinner, and you're creating here the beginnings of the distal taper of the blade. So basically the continual taper from the thickness of the blade at the back down to how thin the blade goes at the front. Once you have done your laddering, once you have worked with the cross peen, you will see there's ridges in it, so switch back to the face of your hammer and hammer it flat on the anvil to take out any marks. You want this to be nice and clean, so the best way to do this is to hammer in one spot and draw the metal through it. Don't move the hammer up and down, move the metal up and down across the face of the anvil, but hammer in one spot. That way, with overlapping hammer blows, you can actually make it nice and tidy. You can see here that point's forming quite nicely, and already we have the blade at the length we want it. I'm actually working to about 110 millimeters, so 11 centimeters in a blade length, and the handle itself, when it's finished, will be about 93 millimeters, but we will also actually forge the tang out to 110 millimeters also. So will basically be the same length. Once we have forged out the blade, we put in a center mark to show us where the extent of the blade is, and we're going to chisel off the excess. I'm only maybe leaving an inch extra material on the end, and I'm cutting at an angle because that will help with the formation of the blade on the rest of the material. but it also helps with the forming of the tang. It means we don't have too much material on the end and have to work too much of it down and waste too much material when we make that tang. You can chisel it all the way off, but I tend to go 3/4 of the way through. As you see, bend it over the anvil until you can wiggle it off with your tongs. And you can see our angled cut there. From that, we'll be forging the tang, as I say, that last inch. We'll do that by bringing it to the edge of the anvil, raising him up, and with our hammer in line with the edge of the anvil, a couple of strikes to create what's called a double set down. Now this is quite tricky to make sure everything's all in the same spot, but very quickly you can work it, and if you have good hammer control you can work it down, and you can see clearly defined now we've got where the tang will come from. As I said, make sure you work this metal hot. When you do the double set down, the hotter the metal is, the better. It's the same with chiseling as well. The hotter the metal is, the better. Of course, go too far, you can melt the blade, and spring steel, especially cast spring, actually is incredibly susceptible to that. If you burn it, generally it will crumble away quite quickly. So work this nice and hot, 980 degrees, incandescent yellow. Makes your life a heck of a lot easier as well when forging it down. And once we have, of course, started that taper, we now need to extend it, extend the tang. And again, we're trying to forge this tang out to 110 millimeters as well, 11 centimeters. And we want to make it long, just like the blade, without making it wider. So I switch between using the crosspeen of the hammer on the flat and then the face of my hammer on the top of the tang. And of course, once you have crosspeened it and laddered it the same way as the blade, you then need to hammer it flat, hammer the face flat and smooth to make sure there aren't any ridges or bumps in the blade, in the tang. We want this to be as cleanly forged. The closer you forge to the end product item, the less you have to do on machines, on grinding tools and the like. So we want to get nice and close. Usually I would forge my blades almost to completion so that the grinding is minimal. It can make heat treatment a bit tricky, but so if you're not too confident about that, then of course leave a little bit of extra material on, a little bit of extra thickness to prevent the blade from warping when you do heat treat it. As I say myself, I usually try to forge this as close to completion as I can. There we go, we're pretty much there. We might need a little bit more work on the tang just to extend it a bit more. Last bit, you want the tang to be quite wide near the blade, but coming down to a very fine nail point at the end. That will help when you have to peen the tang over. And working him hot at this point is incredibly important, because if you work it too cold at the tang, you actually work hard on that blade. And if you don't heat treat him properly over the course of working this knife, you'll find that that metal is so tough, peening it at the end will be very difficult. So you want to make sure that the tang remains quite nice and soft. So with the tang forged, gotta get a bit more work onto the blade now. We've only done its general shape. What we need to do is we actually need to put its cutting edge on. And having the tang forge really helps us to find where that will be. So I'm making sure everything's nice and level, nice and clean. There's a nice distal taper, putting on a bit of a counter curve, pointing him downwards. And the side that has that curve on now is where we will forge the cutting edge. This knife at its widest point will be 20 mm wide, 2 cm wide. So we will extend him a little bit beyond that. Putting on the cutting edge of the blade, we put the blade flat on the anvil, raise its back, its spine up slightly on the angle, and then forge on his cutting edge at the other side. This will push the metal up, and if you haven't put enough of a counter curve, it will cause the metal to curve upwards, a bit like a banana. If you put too much of a counter curve, you'll find that you'll struggle to actually bring it back, and that can distort the shape of the blade. So just a slight one. You can always work it a bit more If he has curved up high as well, take some material from the spine, lie him flat on the anvil, and work the spine of the blade down again. Always trying to keep overlapping blows to keep things nice and tidy. But if you widen the blade on its back, it will push that point back down as well. And that's what we're trying to do. And we're trying to make sure as well we have a nice even chamfer running through the blade. A nice even bevel. So it continually slopes down from the back of the blade to its cutting edge. We don't want to double bevel this one. All we'll do when we get to the end is we of course will grind that single bevel on. It's historically correct for a lot of the knives. Of course there are always exceptions. And when we get to that cutting edge, we'll just put a slight apple seed edge on just to give it a bit more toughness at that tip so it doesn't wear away too quickly. This particular example of a knife has a slight drop in the handle, so we are just dropping the tang down a little bit. He terminates in the middle, he starts at the middle, sorry, of the blade, but we want to make sure that point just drops down so it's just below being in line with the point, the tip of the knife. You can see there that nice little bit of a drop. It's just the style of this knife, doesn't have to be, you can keep it straight, you can do whatever you want with it. As long as you can thread that through a handle once you've drilled through. Of course, once the blade is forged, we need to grind it. First you'll give it a first rough grind just to tidy it up and define it a bit more. People at this point who see me and know I make historic blades will be crying out, well, they don't have belt grinders in the medieval period. They don't, no. What they do have is grindstones, either operated by apprentices turning them or by water running through, water-operated ones. We know they have similar grindstones from the Roman period, and so essentially you have the same process. It just takes longer. So economy, I use a belt grinder. This first grinding you're using really to tidy him up, to make sure he's nice and even, get that nice edge, that nice slope, so that you can then go through the heat treatment processes. We do that first because if you overheat it while grinding, this normalizing process here will remove any of the stresses from forging and grinding. So heat your blade up to above 880 degrees, hold it at that temperature for a while, usually 10 minutes in the forge, and then bury it in the ashes around your forge and leave it to cool slowly. That relieves the stresses. Once you have done that, you are ready to go on to hardening. Again, heat that blade up to above critical temperature, so in this case 880 degrees. Bring him out to fire, straight into your oil. Don't use water on this spring, use oil. Keep the blade nice and straight when you do, and shake it to make sure no bubbles form, causing uneven quenching across the blade. Once you have quenched it and hardened it, clean him up again so you can see when you temper him, you can see temper colours move through. Here I heat a bar up, incredibly hot, about 980 degrees, and I let the heat travel through. And what we're looking for is to make a straw colour permeate the blade. You can repeat that process several times. Usually people do it 3 times to make sure that temper has evenly passed through the blade. Again, as I said, you're aiming for straw. I haven't shown fitting the handle on this because there's no special trick to it that I use. I just get the materials, I measure where the tang needs to go, and I drill through. Take your time. Once you've drilled the holes, file out, increase the size of the holes as you need to fit the tang. Just take your time and make sure you're not trying to cut any corners. That's the key. I have layered this up with bronze, leather, ebony, leather, and bronze. I've now cut the tang back to about 6mm, 4 to 6mm on this one. Usually it's 1.5 the thickness of the tang, maybe a little less. And with it fixed firmly in the vise with a bit of gaffer tape around the blade so that it doesn't scratch the blade in the vise, I now use the ball peen of my hammer and I work that the tang down, peening over like a rivet head. You can see I'm working in a circle as I go. If you find that when you are peening your tang, it seems like it's reached its point, it won't move anymore, but it's still not completely fixed the handle in place, take it to your grinder, grind it down a little bit, put it back in the vise and carry on working. And when you're done, nothing should move. If anything's still moving, you need to keep going, you need to keep working that tang down. Should be nice and fitted nice and tight. Once you have fitted that, that's great. You can now move on to shaping the handle. Again, belt grinder. Please wear some form of safety equipment. At least your face mask and safety specs. Pieces can fly off, get your eyes, and also some woods produce very toxic dust. Ebony is one of them. So make sure you're wearing appropriate PPE when doing this. I'm working this down into a slightly oval, transitioning into a cylindrical handle as per the original. And we will go through belts ranging from 36 grit all the way up to 400 grit. I will then use sandpaper, going up to 600 in this, and then I use wire wool, very fine wire wool, to bring up a lovely finish. We'll then polish the blade up, sharpen it, apply oil to the handle. Those I'll show in other videos. Essentially, there's plenty of resources out there for it. We don't have time to show them all today. So here we have the finished knife. Hopefully you end up with something looking similar, or however you've designed it. You should have a nice completed knife, and hopefully this has been helpful. Hey, send me pictures, show me what yours looks like. And we will have further videos showing how to sharpen the knife, and also making the sheath of this knife. So keep an eye out for that. Do subscribe to my channel, see when the next films are coming out, and we shall see you again soon. Have a good day, guys.